Brought to you by Telehelping, a virtual assistant staffing company for professionals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Hall. I am the host of The Faces, Entrepreneurs Are People Too, and the founding CEO of Telehelping, the herein sponsor of my podcast. So I appreciate you, Telehelping, for allowing me the opportunity to talk to wonderful people like Jason. Jason, how are you this morning?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm, kicking it off. It's a beautiful Wednesday. I would be lying to say that I'd have a long day in front of me, but you are the last work I plan on doing until the end of day call. So I'm pretty ready to go ahead and have a good conversation with you and maybe go walk my dog.
Sounds like a good plan.
No, it's not bad at all, sir. But I'm excited to chat with you. We've already had a really great pre-conversation, but I want to, before we jump into it too far, let's kind of tell the listeners today, who are we chatting with? Who's Jason?
Well, other than my business, I'm father to 3 awesome kids. I've got 2 daughters and a son. My oldest daughter is a nurse anesthetist in Tampa, Florida. My son is a business development executive, and my daughter is newly graduated and working at a children's hospital here in Orlando in the department that helps the health and wellness of the team at the hospital. And I am an avid cyclist, lifelong workout nut, and also a motorsports nut. I just got back from Miami F1, which was an incredible experience. So I am a little tanner than
a little tanner because of Miami.
Because I got a fair bit of sun since I was out there all day, every day of that event. And then I'm founder and chairman of Synergy, and we are a healthcare lien resolution company. We work with personal injury law firms as a BPO outsourcing partner for them so that they don't have to handle negotiating and resolving healthcare liens. We do that for them to basically help the injured party net as much as they possibly can from their settlements, because unfortunately, most people don't get enough when they're injured to take care of themselves. So every dollar counts, and we fight for every dollar for the injured.
No, that's a very relevant. So one good point. It's nice to have someone else on the call who's a exercise nut like myself. But likewise, not too often do I get another BPO on here. I myself am a BPO in essence. BPO is a very broad category. However, I think I can count on one hand how many people know what a BPO is until they come across and I explain to them. So, that's interesting. I'm excited to dive into that. But I also want to talk about motorsports. Big motorsport guy myself. Very, very happy that Formula One is in Las Vegas. And so I'm excited for that come this November. So my kid is a big car noise maker. And so I'm excited to go watch that with him.
Yeah, I'm planning actually to volunteer for that event, which is what I just came back from Miami doing. I was actually working as a flagging marshal, so I kind of rotated through different positions, but did comms, did yellow and red flag and white and blue flag, which was a really interesting experience for me, seeing the logistics of a race, but also because I'm a driver and I'm out on track myself a lot. So I had never seen, the faces behind the people that are waving flags at me normally when I'm on track. And getting that experience was super cool. And just being that close to F1 and the Porsche Cup. I'm a Porsche guy. So it was just super cool experience.
No, I'm a track goer myself, sports car owner, enthusiast, car club guy. And so I'm a true blood 911 guy myself. I've always been a Porsche guy since way before I even knew, the different types of Porsches or ability to have one. So I've gotten to do a lot of track experiences myself. I don't know if there's a Fahrenheit track out in 29 Palms where they do a lot of a lot of the race car drivers own properties there, and they have private tracks. And so BMW has a track there, Porsche has a track there. And so I've gone to that track a couple of times. I've not only been on the track myself, but I've been in the car with my wife as she goes around the track. And that's far more, blood pumping than actually driving. Instead, being with your wife. I'm calling lines to my wife, screaming at her. I'm like blue, 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 red, 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 blue. So, man, good thing it was not my car. It was BMW. So I really didn't care too much. We already signed the liability paperwork.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm an instructor, so I teach other people. I'm a Porch Club of America instructor. So I took my significant other out and I instructed her, which was an interesting experience, to be right seat with someone you love. And thankfully she said, God, I never knew this about you, how calm you were out there. Cause when you're right seating and you're not in control of the car, you really do have to maintain your poise, other than
Yeah.
if it's an emergency situation and telling that person to brake, and make sure that they slow the car down enough to make the next corner. But it's interesting to do that. And actually, I've instructed my son to, which that was much harder actually than my significant other. I figured out I can't do that with him anymore.
I think it tests the boundaries of any relationship when you're trying to pass on knowledge to somebody. And I am not an instructor. While I'm very smooth in control when I'm driving, I am definitely not smooth in control when she's driving. Actually, I don't do well in the passenger seat at all, ever. When I'm sitting in a car, I tell, maybe because I drive much more controlled, and I feel like my wife doesn't drive more controlled. And so I'm always very anxious when I'm a passenger. So I much rather drive. I will drive everywhere for us at all times.
Actually, I'm the same way, but I've learned that there's a lot I can learn by right seating on the track. Seeing the track from that angle, and it's just different, and you learn things. For me, there's also just some joy in helping someone else discover what I love, even though there's a lot that goes into it, just to be able to do it. I really love that the time that I get on the track is time where I'm not thinking about synergy. I'm not thinking about anyone else. I'm fully in the moment, fully present, concentrating on what I'm doing. And those moments are pretty rare. I used to get that from cycling, which is kind of how I transitioned into motorsports. I'd always been a car guy, but when I stopped competitive cycling, I wanted some other competitive outlet that also gave me that being able to be 100% focused on one thing and one thing only.
Staying focused is difficult. When I'm owning your business, I'm chair and CEO telehelping. So it's basically my other color of blood. It pumps in my veins every day. And so the only time I've started getting really disciplined about it is when I'm outside of the office, or even when I'm at home, I'm in my home office, I will do not disturb on my phone, because it will never stop otherwise. Because even when I'm not in my seat, my team's always moving, right? And then they start Pacific Standard Time. They start with me in the wee hours. I start getting good morning messages at 7 a.m. and then they're working until 7, 8 o'clock at night. I don't work all those hours. I generally don't. When I'm trading before 7 a.m., I don't want to talk to them. So I want do not disturb. And then when I'm done for the day, I usually hit do not disturb. And I didn't, I was really disciplined about it for a long time. And I go to Orange Theory when I'm not playing tennis. And so when I go to Orange Theory and I get in there, I do not disturb my phone. There's nothing, barring an emergency that my wife can call me twice and it will go through my do not disturb, that anyone needs me for that hour. It just doesn't exist. And so I get on there, I get on the treadmill, I zone out. And much like I'm sure you do on those 100-mile rides or those 30-mile rides, you get so much done for yourself in your, Craig, you are in your home office when you're in that zone. And for me, it's when I'm in that treadmill, I'm just staring in the mirror because I have mirrors in front of it, which I hate, right? Because I just have to stare at myself the entire time. But I just like stare at in my own eyes. I'm thinking about the day, the challenges, working through my own mental blocks. And you need those periods, and people don't work those into their day.
No, absolutely. I do that with exercise still, and I still cycle, even though I'm not competing anymore. I still go out and ride, and it's amazing when I do spend that hour, as opposed to in the gym. I'm a little less so. I typically do have 45, so it's so high intensity that usually I'm not able
Yeah.
to process. Like on the
Yeah.
bike, I'll process things in my head, and thoughts and different things come up that I can execute on. It's crazy how that
Yeah.
works.
I don't do that with tennis, because if I'm not thinking about tennis when I'm playing tennis, like yesterday, um, I caught a wild ball with my racket as it was coming at my face. Right? It was just one of those right at me kind of things. And if my mind was on telehelp, I'd have a really sweet round mark somewhere on my face because you have to be there because things are happening so much quicker. And that is truly, like, I don't ignore everything when I'm on the tennis court. Like, I don't even wear my Apple Watch unless it's on Do Not Disturb. And if, or just let it die because I don't want to be bothered. I want to enjoy my competition, right? And then I want to move on, right?
Yep.
And I think that's what's important too, as leaders of businesses. We have to be able to make those divides. And so I'm sure that's why you've been successful at Synergy. How long has Synergy been in the mix? How long have you been running the organization?
Started the company in 2008, and was with another company that was sort of in an adjacent space, and was president of that company. It had been started by a friend of mine, and decided I wanted to do my own thing. So came up with the concept of what I believed the market needed, and that's how Synergy was born.
Nice. Yeah, that's 2008. What a time to start a business, Jason. Right? Was it early in? Was it after the crash started? What time of 2008 was it for you?
It was right around that time. Thankfully, one of the things about our world is that it's rarely impacted too much by what's going on in the economy, because people get hurt regardless.
Yeah.
And there were some instances with some of the things going on with the mortgage-backed securities crisis that occurred that kind of changed some of the behaviors of the insurers, or they were holding money longer and not wanting to settle. So there was some impact, but probably the biggest impact was COVID, because when people were sheltering in place, car accidents weren't happening, and so there was a period of time where that people weren't getting hurt at work, which is a good thing, but that there was some impact to our business. But generally, we're pretty immune from economic factors, so it really was not a bad time to start the company.
That's great to hear, and correct. While it's a great thing people weren't getting hurt, when your business is in the business of said action or unfortunate circumstances, yes, right. It's great for car insurance, right? They're not getting accidents, right? They're just collecting premiums. Uh, but it's the same thing with telehelping. When things get constrained and actually the economy does worse, we actually see an uptick, right? But we're in the business of being an affordable. I'm that person who's always thinking about affordability. Even when I have much, I'm always trying to be intelligent about how I spend it. Right? I'm never frivolous. However, when there isn't any excess going on in the market, I find that that's when people come to us more frequently. So people are always like, well, how's business? Well, I'm like, every time there's a layoff, someone gets worried because, much of the people who we work with, just like we do, we're in healthcare, we support healthcare clients. That's immune pretty much to the greater, impact of the economy. legal work, law is going to happen regardless. Our clients are oftentimes, I'd have to say our biggest lawyer clients are estate attorneys. Estates are still going on, right? Wealth managers, if more than ever, wealth managers are going to be managing people's assets and making decisions for them on a more frequent basis. So I do appreciate our level of resistance, right? We're not immune to it, but we're resistant to the overall shift in economy.
Yeah. Yeah. And law is, certainly evolving and changing a lot with what's going on with AI and tech finally kind of infiltrating the profession a bit. Because really, at least in our space, it's been a slower uptake. But it's interesting to watch what's going on with that technology infusion. But I think ultimately it's going to be helpful to law firms and law practices in terms of efficiency and how they can go through thousands of documents, for example, in a personal injury case with AI technology pulling out what's relevant and pertinent to that particular case, or going through all of the medical information to create a demand for settlement. So, the technology end of it is going to be interesting to see what happens. But I do know that, with what happened with COVID, for example, there was a lot of changes that happened in the law profession. I have a law firm aside from Synergy, and I do a little bit of litigation in the state of Florida with Medicaid. When they assert a lien against a settlement, I'll go to court and handle those cases because Synergy can't do it because Synergy is not a law firm. Well, those cases, traditionally, I would go to a workers' comp judge of compensation claims office and do a hearing virtually, which is weird, with a judge in Tallahassee. Now, today, all those hearings happen via Zoom. Everything's done electronically. I don't send papers anymore. That's all just since COVID changes. And, a lot of things have changed because of that. The
Jason,
Zoom
I lost you, I think.
Or video conferencing capabilities are now so ingrained. Yeah, and I was talking about just how much things have changed because of COVID and technology. It used to be that we would have to travel for these hearings that I do, and now they're all done via Zoom and everything is done electronically. I don't file documents in paper form anymore. We do it all electronically. And so things have changed dramatically because of what happened with COVID and how technology is slowly moving the profession towards a more electronic world. And there's a lot of really cool AI tools that are being deployed that I think are going to help law firms be more efficient and ultimately more profitable, which is part of, what we bring to the table for law firms is helping them be more efficient and profitable by taking off their plates and their team's plates a task that is very much administrative in nature and does require some specific knowledge and skill sets to negotiate with these different types of healthcare liens. So, we're very similar in the way technology can help law firms, our services, which is also tech enabled too, helps those law firms become more efficient and profitable. So, all in all, the technology I think is a really good thing that's changing very rapidly.
No, it is. COVID for us, when I still worked in the healthcare space, we were majority of our 200 plus staff that I led were going out to see the clients in their homes. Well, COVID came around and that became telephonic, right? Medicare and Medicaid started recognizing these, we had that exemption period there, and they carried over a lot of it afterwards where they would bill the same rate for seeing telephonic visits. And that changed the entire game for us. One of the clients that we have in a previous podcast guest owns Parallax AI, and it is a law platform that uses AI to help the end users, small business owners and things like that, to actually pre-screen them for its Uber-like model, right? For lawyers on the other end to jump in and do a review and a stamp of approval without having to do all the work for the legal document. So it's a really cool platform that lets people use the ease of the Chat GPT world, where everyone likes to use that for all the legal paperwork, which you really shouldn't. But if you do, we know we know you exist. All right, you're probably half of my followers over here because we have a lot of younger, newer entrepreneurs who watch this channel. But getting a little bit of a lawyer in the mix of that gives them the liability stamp of, oh, a lawyer actually looked at this. This is not Chat GPT stamped. And so we are in that interesting space, though, where people are leading with technology. And I think that it's a scary space to be in because we over rely on things sometimes, especially when we give a degree of competency to a piece of technology because it is either commonly or widely used, and it has its place, but certain people will never be fully replaced in our lifetime, I believe. And I think lawyers are going to be one of those people. They still have a place in the world when it comes to drafting documents and certifying them.
No, absolutely. And there's been some very notable instances of lawyers using ChatGPT to draft a brief, for example, and it made up citations to cases that don't exist. And
I heard of that one.
Lawyers, obviously can get in a lot of trouble for that. Go figure. Certainly it does have its place and can help efficiency of really any business today. The key is what you said, which is you've got to know how to use it effectively, and make sure that you also have professionals. Thankfully for us, I don't think technology can ever replace what we do, which is a lot of times, negotiating with a person
Correct.
on the other side, discussing arguments about why, for example, a lien should be reduced because of the made whole doctrine, which is a legal doctrine. So, that kind of interaction cannot be replaced by a computer. Now, can a computer help someone make a better argument? Yeah, that's a great way to use technology to hone in on, for example, plan language, which we review because there's subrogation language, recovery language in every health insurance plan. So we have to find that language, interpret it, and make arguments about why the plan should reduce their claim against the settlement based on, these principles. And so technology can help assist with that, but it's never going to take the place completely of that interaction of talking to another person about that. And just like you said, you don't want to use technology to draft legal documents because it can make stuff up. It's
Correct.
pulling from whatever is in that large language model, and that may or may not be correct. And if you rely upon it, you could rely upon it to your detriment.
And that's a very sage point, right? Before you lean against the wall, understand first that it's not thin paper. And so, and that's interesting that you bring up that, because I would say even myself, I have a loose understanding of exactly what Synergy does, talking about medical liens, right? Tell us a little bit, what is it that you specifically are doing? Are you representing the healthcare company? Are you representing the person? I have my understanding of what you do, but let's talk to the listeners here. What is Synergy's purpose? What is it conducting?
Well, let me give you a real world example. I
Please.
was cycling in 2016 and was struck by a car. I was out for a training ride, was seriously injured, wound up in the ICU and 21 days total in the hospital. And I racked up almost $400,000 in medical bills when I was injured. my health insurance plan, which insures Synergy, which is an ERISA plan, which is an employer-based health insurance plan, paid for all of my health care. So I got a bill when I got home from the hospital, which is how I knew what the total charges were. My health insurance plan paid, I think it was around 170 grand, somewhere in that ballpark, because they've got negotiated rates, so they don't pay the full
Yeah.
hospital bill. So when my personal injury case was settled, our health insurance plan said, "Hey, pay us back. We paid 178 grand." And so I negotiated with them for my benefit to get them to accept less than what they were asking for. And it's a back and forth, like almost like what you do when you're buying a car and you're negotiating or any other negotiation, right? So we're hired by personal injury law firms on behalf of the injured party
Mm.
to negotiate with these plans. Now, these plans, for example, ERISA plans and some government plans too, they are represented by recovery vendors that are like us, except they work on behalf of the insurance plans and they are trying to recover every single dollar because that's how they get paid. And we're paid on the reverse. We get paid for every single dollar we put back into the injured party's pocket. So we negotiate and resolve with Medicare, Medicaid, ERISA, FEBA, which is federal employees. They have their own health benefit plan, military, private insurance, could be hospital bills because sometimes people get hurt and they don't have any insurance. And so the hospital will have this crazy bill like I got, and we have to negotiate and resolve with them based on reasonable value. But all these different insurance plans are specialties in of themselves, and you have to have specialized knowledge. So we've assembled a pretty massive expert team, mostly from those recovery vendors I mentioned, where we hired from them because they understand the inside baseball and understand how to get the deepest discount from the plans to benefit the injured party, which is our mission, which is helping families and improving the lives of the injured, and then also being a really incredible partner to the law firms that decide that they want to work with us to outsource this, what is a very burdensome task for personal injury law firms.
Very much so. And ultimately, if these things aren't resolved, they become I'm sure, a lien on the entire person's assets as a whole, whether if they own a home or they have an umbrella policy, things like that.
Yeah, they can become problems. Generally speaking, that's not an issue because lawyers who represent the injured ethically must resolve these things. You can't ignore them. And an injured party can't simply just say, well, don't pay back Medicare, for example, because Medicare then has a claim directly against the personal injury law firm for double the amount. There's a double damages clause in the Medicare Secondary Payer Act. And for the injured party, Medicare, for example, could come after them. And so, generally these things are either resolved by the law firm or they hire us to negotiate and resolve.
It's interesting, Jason. I think my perception of personal injury may be skewed because when you say personal injury, I'm thinking you got hit by a car, right? You're riding a bike, you're hit by a car. Where was the insurance for that vehicle? Didn't they have liability to cover them running over a cyclist?
Well, they do. Unfortunately, here in Florida, this driver was carrying the minimum coverage, which was 10 grand.
Of course he was.
And thankfully, I had a lot of coverage, which is underinsured or uninsured motorist. So my own insurance company was the one I had to sue to get them to pay me. And then that's just the way this world works, is that, even though I was in a bike lane, clear liability, this car hit me in a bike lane, my insurer refused to pay when I made my claim. So, of course, I have to sue them to get them to and litigated. I mean, we litigated it for about a year before we went to a mediation and told the adjuster, are you sure you really want to put a lawyer on the stand to explain to the jury how, breaking every bone in my face impacted my life and how having my jaw wired shut for 3 months and eating through a straw, wasn't great. Anyway, that
Correct.
we settled that day, but still there is all these hoops to jump through. That's why people, when they get hurt, they have to hire a personal injury lawyer, because the insurance companies, left to their own devices, will not do the right thing. It's just,
Yeah.
I get it, because they're a business. They want to collect premiums. They don't want to pay out claims. But the reality is if you're injured, you're going to have to hire a personal injury lawyer, or you're going to get a pittance, and you're not going to get reimbursed for truly what all your damages are, which is what's important, because it's the only thing our system can do, is give you money when you've been hurt. And honestly, I'd rather give back the money I got, because, you know, the pain and suffering and the permanent injuries I suffered, I would much rather not have that money.
I tell people that every day. I'm medically retired from the military, and people are like, wow, that must be great. And I say, let me tell you, it's not worth the money I get every month, right? I live every day, and I choose to be as active as I am, right? Because I'd rather be active and in pain than less pain and not active. So I probably could manage that differently if I wanted to not play sports. But I live every day like a 6 and a 7 with back pain every day, right knee pain every day. And like, wow, it must be great to be medically retired. It'd be great being 35 and not having a bad back or having a bad right knee, or a weak left shoulder. Like, I love all those things. And so, and I think that's what people always like, oh, it must have been great to have been paid out. Like, it would have been great not to have been injured.
Yeah. Well, and, just the long-term impacts of that. I had a bunch of dental injuries, and I recently had to have a dental implant done because of where my jaw was broken on the lower here. The tooth right where that break occurred died, and just all of a sudden, they saw in an X-ray, hey, it's we're gonna have to extract it and put a dental implant in. And I've got a $60,000 mouth now because of all the dental work I had to have done. Because a lot of dental injuries.
I thought you had a beautiful smile. That's what I thought. I thought that said, like, man, that's a nice smile. All I have to
I,
do is get ran over.
I had a pretty good one before, though. So unfortunately, I it's funny, because I had done Invisalign, because I had braces as a kid, and I'd done Invisalign like 2 years before I got hit. And I was like, darn it, all that pain in the neck, and all gone in a sec.
Oh, it definitely is. And I think that you've positioned yourself in a very interesting place as a lawyer working in this particular field. I myself had to go toe to toe. It's been 2022. I totaled my vehicle, a very expensive vehicle, right? And in 2022, we are still dealing with the inflation of high end vehicles, and so the amount that the vehicle was purchased for and the amount that the insurance was saying it was worth were two different ones. They were about $125,000 off, right? Just to give you a representation. And so they're like, here's your check. And I was like, that's not my check. And they're like, well, this is what the car's worth. I was like, please, if you can go out and buy the same vehicle I had with that money, I would like you to do so. I'd like you to do a car replacement, please. But you can't. And so I had to go back and forth with them nonstop. And I needed them I had to end up getting to a point where they denied me. I had gap insurance, because you don't buy an expensive car and not have a gap insurance. So I ended up having gap insurance that came through and kicked in and gave me back the value of my car, right? Allowing me to buy another car of similar statue. But it was such a pain, because you're right. Insurance, And I feel like I used to bill Medicare and Medicaid all the time through my different healthcare companies. Sometimes I feel like they deny you just to see if they're, or they hit you with a certain amount just to see if you're going to accept it sometimes. And just to put you in a position to barter, because they're banking that most people will either accept denials or accept low payments. We used to get half payments all the time. We used to get a pay per head, a stipend every month. And they used to always cut like, oh, well, we're going to give you half of this one because of X, Y, and Z. And you have to go back and rationalize why you should get the full. I feel like they do that on purpose sometimes, and just to see if you're willing to go toe and toe with them, especially if they're paying you millions of dollars. And so, especially as a company, if they're paying millions of dollars, they would always constantly at the organization, they owe us like $3 million plus, and they'd want to pay us like 1.6. And I would always have to go back line by line item. We'd have to argue why that patient was X, Y, Z.
Well, and two, if you think about it, if you're an insurance company and in the litigation context, my claim, for example, if they delay it for a year, that's another year they get to keep that money in whatever institutional investments they have, and they're making more than most of us are. So, that strategy, you multiply that times every policy in the United States, there are reasons why they don't pay out immediately. And then obviously, like you've described, there are certain tactics and things that they do because it does, inure to their benefit. And it's funny because there are lawyers out there that all they do is diminution in value of vehicles because of the issue that you talked about. There's a lawyer in Florida who's a personal injury lawyer, but he's also a Porsche Club of America guy, and I see him advertising for those cases in the magazine, and that's just one of his niches, which is a very smart one.
Oh yeah, because it happens to us. Because I just caught the wrong turn. Right, it happens to everybody. As we come back down towards the end, Jason, my one question that I have lingering with this that I think would be a good one to wrap up on is, does your work make you a negative person? Does it make you look at life in a certain lens, or are you able to sandbox it?
I think, and probably I was always more oriented to being a realist, but I recognize the dangers. So, I would talk to my kids when they were younger just about cases I saw so that they understood the risks out there. And because I think, you should have a healthy dose of, when you go to the doctor, knowing that they're not God, and you have to advocate for yourself, especially when you're in the hospital, for example, because mistakes happen and life-changing mistakes happen in the hospital or happen because a doctor makes a mistake. And you have to understand that if you ride a motorcycle, there's a good chance you're going to get struck, and there's a good chance you're going to lose your leg, because that's a very common injury. Because car versus motorcycle, with a leg, the car wins and the rider loses their leg, or they wind up with a brain injury. So, those sorts of things I think are things that when you see it, you can't help but understand the risks. But I don't think I let it paralyze me or make me incredibly cynical, or, I just try to operate more from a place of realism, still with a dose of hope. The hope that, no one in my family experiences what I even experienced, because I don't want anyone to experience that. It's, pretty horrible when you wind up waking up in a hospital trauma center with tubes shoved down your throat and, on a ventilator, for example. That I don't wish that upon anybody. And that experience, is one that, all too often people do find themselves a victim of. And so you have to have hope, but also know that things like that can happen, and you have to be prepared.
No, Jason, I absolutely agree. And so, wonderful perspectives. wonderful life that you've been able to put together for yourself. I think that you've been able to carve out a beautiful niche from the legal perspective to the healthcare side, and at the same time have hobbies, have talents, and a family along the way. So, sir, I want to thank you for giving me your time today. Thank you for giving the listeners time. I know they've been able to hear a beautiful story and be able to take something from it as well. And so thank you all for listening today. Jason, thank you for your time. If you have any questions for Jason, feel free to follow up with us. We'll have Jason's information so you can reach out to him on LinkedIn as well as his website, bugged right here into the podcast itself. And of course, for some reason, if you cannot hit rewind or click on that, you can always email us at info@thefacespodcast.com, and one of my team members will ensure you get connected. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Jason, thank you for your time.
Cody, great to be with you today.
Be well, sir.
This video was brought to you by our official sponsor, Telehelping. Need support for your business? Telehelping connects you with top-tier remote staff to help you streamline operations and fuel growth. Go to telehelping.com and get started today.